Now, if you're new to my channel, one of my most popular videos is the top 10 worst episodes of good cartoons. And ever since I first uploaded it, people have been requesting a sequel. Of course, that sequel is usually for the top 10 best episodes of bad cartoons, but I don't know, I think it's a little different calling an entire show bad as opposed to calling a single episode bad. I mean, the only shows I've come across so far that I would be comfortable calling bad are shows like the Adult Party cartoon and Alan Gregory. And it's safe to say I don't think those shows have any good episodes. However, one challenge in discussing good cartoons is discussing underrated episodes, because underrated seems to have a different meaning for each person. I've come across people who call A Pal for Gary and One Course Meal underrated, and most will admit they don't even think they're that good to begin with. Now for me, underrated means an episode that you can argue is a top 10 worthy episode, that not many others seem to consider top 10 worthy, and that's exactly how I'm gonna judge these episodes. So let's get started. This is the top 10 underrated episodes of good cartoons. The Deep South from Futurama. Yeah, unlike the last list I did, I'm not going to exclude episodes I've already talked about, because discussing why an episode is underrated gives me different things to discuss with the episodes as opposed to just stating why I think they're good. It's about the Planet Express crew getting trapped at the bottom of the ocean, and Fry starts a relationship with a mermaid named Umbriel. Now unsurprisingly, Futurama is very similar to The Simpsons in many fan aspects, including there being an abundance of episodes that you can argue don't get enough respect. For me, it was always The Deep South, though I think it's more because it fits my sense of humor better than any other Futurama episode. I really enjoy Bender's quotes here. I mean, yeah, he's already a quotable character, but good God, he brought his A game to this episode.
Harpoon my ass.
Okay.
Oh!
I just caught a fish this big.
Quit exaggerating, Fry. What do you say we make it interesting? Everybody kick in $5. There, wasn't that interesting?
That one is still my favorite joke from Futurama. Fry's relationship with Umbriel, I mean, I can see people finding that boring, but I still like what they do with it because it feels like the whole relationship is meant to be a joke. I mean, they reveal what it was building up to at the very end, but they don't focus on the punchline. In fact, the punchline is right there in the open, but you don't really think about it because they spend so much time getting other jokes in with these characters that they're actively avoiding going with the obvious jokes, and I find that respectable. It shows a lot of effort to me. But yeah, I do put this pretty low on the list, just because I get why not many people remember this episode. But I still think there's a nice abundance of humor here that gets overlooked, and I'd like to see this episode get a little more love.
Why couldn't she be the other kind of mermaid, with the fish part on top and the lady part on the bottom?
Some Friend from Recess. It's interesting because you can make the argument that Recess itself is an underrated show. Ooh, that's an idea. But for those who still remember it fondly, you know there's a nice amount of episodes here that don't get the respect they deserve. And for me, Some Friend is the one that gets the most overlooked. And that's unfortunate because of all of Recess's episodes, I think it's one of the more mature ones. It's about the gang thinking TJ's ditching them for another friend, only to shockingly discover that he's attending the birthday of Finster's aide Menlo. Now the biggest lesson this episode is teaching you is that it's not uncommon for you to drift apart from your friends. Something that I think most kids don't realize at this age, and they handle it perfectly here. Because here, it's actually TJ and Menlo who drifted apart, as they were friends before TJ met the rest of the gang.
Yes, what happened?
We got older, our interests diverged. One accepts these things. But TJ was such a large part of my life, it seemed a shame that nothing would remain to remind me of our friendship. TJ sensed how I felt, so he made a promise that no matter what happened, every year he would come to my birthday party.
That's about as mature and accurate of an explanation as you can give. Even the best of friends can change, but the best thing to do is to accept it, because change isn't always bad. It means you're growing, and of all characters from this show, these would be the two who'd understand that the best. And I especially like the way this episode concludes itself. Not just with that very mature message, but with a great little twist on the title. It's a prime example of how much this show truly understands its audience.
Catch you later.
Not if I catch you first.
Fleabitten Ed from Ed, Edd, and Eddy. Now, I don't expect people to consider this a top 3 or even top 5 episode, but I think it deserves to at least be talked about among the best episodes of the show. It's about the Eds coming up with the pet cleaning service and discovering that Ed is allergic to rabbits, causing him to balloon up and, in hilarious cartoon fashion, actually start floating, so the other Eds try to cure him. Me personally, I think this is the absolute funniest episode of the whole show. The slapstick with Ed flying around the garage is great. Eddie, I think, delivers some of his best one-liners. There's some hilarious wordplay jokes thrown in.
Ed, you put the sign on upside down! No, I put the sign on the garage! Just flip it over, Ed! Huh? I flipped it, Eddie!
And I think it shows the best of the Eds. I mean, they put their money-making service on hold to help Ed, even though, technically, he's not that much help to them. I don't know, there's something kind of charming about that. Like I said, I don't expect others to find it as good as I do, but it feels like this episode gets unfairly overlooked and deserves a little more love. But I guess that is gonna happen to some episodes when you come from a show that's flooded with memorable ones.
I'm a pigeon, a big pigeon. Don't lay an egg, bird brain!
I Don't from Daria. This is another show that is actually underrated in of itself. And as for why not many people remember this show,
I'm sure I don't know.
but that's a discussion for another day. This episode is about Daria's cousin getting married and Daria having to go to the wedding, meaning we get to see her extended family for the first and pretty much only time. And Daria ends up bonding with her aunt, while simultaneously being annoyed by the rest of her family's comments.
But Daria, why didn't you get the same dress as the other bridesmaids?
I did.
Now this is another show you can argue is hard to find an underrated episode in, because almost any of them can be underrated. A lot of episodes from the show get high praise for their depictions of real-life issues that teenagers go through. But I picked this one as the one that deserves more praise, because it focuses on one of the more important things a teenager needs: someone to relate to and understand them. Daria has always been considered the weird girl due to her cynical nature, which also makes her look like a buzzkill. But when you see her extended family and how practically none of them act their age, you end up relating with her a little bit more, and it's not in a cheap way. While these characters can act a bit cartoony, it's still easy to connect them with people you might know, especially if you yourself come from a family that just doesn't get along. So when Daria and her aunt sit down and talk about the way people view them, there's kind of this lesson thrown in that people never really do act their age. People either grow up too fast or too slow. And Daria and her aunt are only oddballs to the family because they're the only ones who grew up too fast, which kind of gives this episode a much more relatable vibe to me.
Is life always tawdry, stupid, and humiliating, or is it just a phase?
Just a phase. I'm expecting to grow out of it any time now.
Like I said, this is a show that, as a whole, deserves more attention, so I'm happy to give it what it deserves here.
I mean, you're kind of...
Cool? I know you can't say that to me. Law of the teenagers.
Hank and the Great Glass Elevator from King of the Hill. Out of all the shows I watched growing up, King of the Hill is one of the shows that has aged the best for me. As a kid, I watched it when it was on, but I never considered it a favorite of mine. But this show just seems to get funnier and more personal with age, and this episode is a good example of one that I think has aged well, and also doesn't seem to be remembered as much. It's about the guys going to Austin for Bill's birthday, and Bill ends up meeting and later dating former Governor Ann Richards, voiced for the record by her real-life counterparts. But while at a ball, Bill runs into his ex-wife, the infamous Lenore, making her first and only on-screen appearance. Now maybe it's just me, but I think this is one of the funniest episodes of the series. I think its humor is very sharp. Like, the progressive plot is the most immature you will ever see Hank act, and it's just great. Dale also has what I think are some of his funniest moments. They just seem to sum up everything funny about him to a T.
I'm sorry, sir, we don't have a kosher floor.
This is an outrage. How do you intend to placate me? My God is a vengeful God.
Its secondary plot is pretty hilarious too. Peggy and Bobby end up eating burgers that were made with charcoal, and they enjoy the taste so much, they start treating it exactly like a drug addiction. And yes, Hank treats it very much like one as well, which makes it even funnier. Also, Bill and Ann Richards are actually a charming couple. I mean, yeah, they have an obvious age difference, but there's some really nice chemistry between them.
He's the tackiest man in the United States Senate.
Oh, he's a senator, is he? Oh, I just asked him for a glass of wine.
Oh, Bill, you've made my evening.
But seeing Bill in this struggle, despite being in the healthiest relationship he's ever had, you still get why he's struggling. Lenore's toxicity is referenced so much before this that you already know she has a mental hold on him. And here, you get to actually see how mentally damaging she is. But this episode caps it off in the best way possible, as Bill gets in the greatest last word you'll ever see. That's right, see. You can't say it any clearer than that, and that ties into what resulted in Bill meeting the governor in the first place. So it's all kinds of brilliance. This episode is such a nice blend of comedy and realism, and is, in my opinion, one of the better examples of how ingenious this show was.
She's taking me to a fancy ball. I should probably shower.
Well, it's nuts, but she does have him showering.
Story for Steven from Steven Universe. So in my top 10 worst episodes of Good Cartoons video, I admitted that I hadn't seen the shows Avatar: The Last Airbender or Steven Universe. That has since changed. I've seen the first 4 seasons of Steven Universe, and I'm currently on the 2nd season of Avatar. And both of them, yeah, I think they're great shows. But I've seen more than enough Steven Universe episodes to be comfortable with putting this on the list. Now this episode is pretty straightforward. It's Greg telling Steven about how he met Steven's mother Rose, and eventually the rest of the crystal gems. And how his manager Morty almost prevented that from happening. Now to be fair, I understand season 1 isn't exactly the best season, but I still think this episode gets unfairly overlooked. For one, it has what I think is one of the best songs from the series, like top 5, maybe top 3 best.
But the moment that I hit the stage, thousands of voices are calling my name. And I know in my heart it's been worth it all of the while.
I find everything about this song good. The music, the lyrics, the power behind the vocals. There's just a lot of dedication that went into this song. This is also the first time we get to see the gems before they understand how to talk to humans. So their reactions to Greg, I actually find pretty hilarious.
State your purpose.
I was kind of looking for the mysterious pink lady.
I don't know how to make him go away.
I'll just throw him back over the fence.
And I've said this before, I'm a sucker for a good flashback episode. It's nice getting more of the backstory to some important characters, and this show does flashback episodes very well. But I think this is one of the better flashbacks they've done. Even though it's simple, It gives you a much better feel for the characters, and makes them more fleshed out before the show enters its second season. And more importantly, this was the first episode where Rose actually gets a starring role, which is something I'm sure many fans were looking forward to for a long time. And she's written great here. She's got this really soft, caring feel to her, and she feels like a caring mother, which is kind of how Rose is always described. And it seems like a lot of their future flashback episodes tried to improve on what this episode did, which I think says a lot about it. It's more than a nice little story. It deserves to be considered a classic.
Crash like a comet. I'm just a comet.
The Whirly-Durly Conspiracy from Rick and Morty. Now with Rick and Morty, you can't exactly argue an episode is underrated based on humor alone. Most episodes have a very unique kind of humor that always seems to blend well with the episode. So for a show like this, your reasons will usually be more personal. Now for me, I've always wanted to see an episode that's main focus was just Rick and Jerry. I mean, with polar opposites, it can go one of two ways. They'll be very enjoyable or very cringy. But seeing as it's Rick and Morty, you already know they're gonna find a way to make it work. But for me, everything about Rick and Jerry's plots, I love. I find it all kinds of entertaining, whether it be from a comedic standpoint, a visual standpoint, or even a philosophical standpoint.
Our bodies unchanged, yet our minds have lived 1,000 lifetimes. Is that enough time for me to forgive you?
I don't know, but it's enough time for a synaptic dampener to wear off.
Also, that scene where their essence blends together, it's one of the most creatively bizarre things I've ever seen. It's just brilliant. Now, I know people aren't too fond of Beth's portrayal, and I get it, she's very careless in this episode, and a lot that happens to Summer is the result of Beth not comforting her, and I should find that annoying myself, but I like seeing Morty stand his ground with her. I think the way he does it is hilarious, but it's also kinda new.
You want to be like Rick? Congratulations! You're just as arrogant and just as irresponsible!
Everything okay here?
Mind your own damn business, Gene! I'm having a conversation with my mother here!
I mean, yeah, we've seen Morty stand up to Rick, but seeing him stand his ground to his mother and stand up for Summer the way he does, it's a side of Morty I was happy to see, and it helped me better tolerate Beth's parts. This is just one of those rare episodes that not only gives me something I was looking for, but also made me overlook my previous pet peeves, and I can't really ask more out of an episode than that.
And you have wondered what your life could have been without Rick?
Wondered? Sure. I mean, I've wondered about having a vagina.
Mr. Wynn Goes Country from Hey Arnold. Yeah, trust me, I know Hey Arnold has a ton of episodes that you can argue are underrated too. But of all the ones that are underrated, I feel I have to go with this one. Not only do you not see it on top 10 lists that much, I didn't even put it on mine. It's about Arnold and Gerald discovering that Mr. Wynn has a shockingly good country singing voice and taking him to record a track to play on the radio. But Mr. Wynn isn't interested in being famous and just wants to sing for fun, leading to him being stuck in a morally complicated predicament. Now, Mr. Wynn was always one of the most beloved secondary characters from the show because he's just a good-natured, relatable guy, and he seems to appreciate so much. I mean, hell, the song of his that becomes a hit is about living a simple life.
I got no hankering for grabbing your brass ring. It's crystal clear, I'll stay right here and keep the simple thing.
So it makes sense when Mr. Wynn doesn't take to the life of a country superstar, because it's just not his lifestyle, which the episode is really good about setting up before he becomes famous. The casting is pretty ideal too. That's Randy Travis providing Mr. Wynn's singing voice, and he has one of the few country voices that even non-country fans would enjoy. But not only that, he also voices a parody of himself called Travis Randall, which, I gotta admit, is making pretty good use of your celebrity cameo.
You know, ladies and gentlemen, every once in a while in my line of work, I hear a voice that truly stands out. Unfortunately, that's not the case tonight.
And the whole moral dilemma thing is perfectly executed. Mr. Wynn knows how many people are relying on him that he doesn't want to let them down. But at the same time, he's clearly not happy, which is unfair to him because it's a position he never wanted to be in. But they don't make Arnold and Gerald look like the bad guys either for getting him into that situation. They portray them as kids that didn't know any better and acted on principles that kids would act on. And you know what? This episode holds up more true today than ever, now that we've hit a point where anyone has the potential to become an overnight celebrity. So maybe that's why I overlooked it when I did my own top 10 list. This episode was just a bit ahead of its time. Well, I'm not gonna overlook it anymore.
Well, I have to go town myself.
You know that Wyoming will be your new home.
Suction Cup Symphony from SpongeBob SquarePants. Now, if you're familiar with my channel, you'd probably expect me to put Sailor Mouth here instead of a Season 6 episode. But honestly, I don't think Sailor Mouth is underrated at all. Even though it's my personal favorite episode, I know episodes like Band Geeks and Pizza Delivery are much better overall episodes, and Sailor Mouth I do see get ranked in the top 10 by a lot of people, which is exactly how I think it should be. Suction Cup Symphony, on the other hand, I don't get why people always overlook this episode. I think it's one of the most brilliant episodes to come out of the infamous seasons of SpongeBob. I know that doesn't sound like I'm saying much, but there's a nice amount of good episodes from those seasons, and some of them usually do get that notoriety. But this one hardly ever seems to. Now, seasons 6 through 8 had a much different style than the earlier seasons, but somewhere along the line, the writers seemed to think that changing up your comedic styles meant you also had to change up your characters, and that resulted in a lot of infamous episodes you hear of. But this is one of the few episodes that not only avoided it, they borderline perfected the simplistic styles they were going for here. SpongeBob and Patrick, while annoying, have a perfectly legit reason to be making the noises they are. Their insertion doesn't feel forced because it actually blends in with the opera. The reasons for them being there are justifiable. I mean, anyone who's ever tried writing in a noisy or talkative environment can understand how this happened to Squidward. Their immature jokes feel very fleshed out. And probably best of all, Squidward gets a standing ovation at the end, and because everything that happened was technically Squidward's doing, the ovation he gets feels deserved. So yeah, overall, this episode excels in ways that the infamous seasons always had trouble doing. And it's one of the few that managed to do that, yet never seems to be remembered. And I think that needs to change, because this episode is long overdue for its day in the sun.
Oh yeah, but the real genius is the composer! Squidward! 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 Squidward!
Peter Caviar Eater from Family Guy. Yeah, I will stand by this one till the day I die. This episode should be considered a top 10 best Family Guy episode. It's about Lois's rich aunt dropping dead on her doorstep and leaving her mansion in Cherrywood to the Griffins. And Peter instantly falls in love with the rich lifestyle and sells his house so the family can live in Cherrywood. But eventually Peter becomes too sucked into it, resulting in him putting his family in massive debt.
The vessel goes to $100 million. Mr. Peter Griffin for an astonishing $100 million.
Now, the biggest reason this episode should be considered a top 10 episode is because it seems to have started a lot of elements that would be used in the Family Guy formula. The catchy song, which was Emmy nominated, the out-of-the-box crude humor, the one-liners, the pop culture and historical references, some of which have an actual effect on the plots. all of them either started here or raised the bar from the previous episodes. It's similar to episodes like Scott Tenorman Must Die from South Park and Marge vs. the Monorail from The Simpsons. Now, I'm not saying this should be considered the best Family Guy episode. I mean, episodes like P-Tarded and PTV, those excelled with the Family Guy formula. But I think a lot of their success can be traced back to this episode. And you know what? This episode, I think, shows the best why we as an audience clicked with Peter. Here, yeah, he's being an impulsive idiot, but this episode shows you how Peter feels about the life he's giving Lois, and how he always gets talked down to by Lois's rich friends and family. And when Peter does become a snob like the rest of them, it's actually just an unfortunate result of him trying to be more sophisticated because he feels bad about embarrassing Lois in front of her old friends.
Lois's friend Yacht Boy and his lovely wife Kaka invited us to some hoity-toity auction tomorrow afternoon. I don't want to embarrass her again. You gotta help me, Brian. Teach me how to be a gentleman.
Yeah, we enjoy watching Peter botch stuff up in a doofish way, but there was always heart behind it, and somewhere along the line, Family Guy forgot about that. But here, it's on full display, and the humor is still pretty abundant. You got your choice of Peter's gentleman training, which gives great commentary on how television can both educate you and dumb you down. The lyrics of This House is Freaking Sweet are hilarious, and do a great job summing up what America thinks living in the 1% is like. And Peter's solutions to fix his financial issues aren't only out of the box, but they've seemed to grow more and more plausible as time goes on.
My mansion is historical, all right. Sherry Wood was America's first presidential whorehouse.
Yeah, this episode is dripping with the full potential of the show, and it deserves to be considered one of the best. And as hard as it was for me to rank the other 9 on this list, this was the one episode I was sure of. It's by far the most underrated episode I've ever come across. And it's one of the biggest reasons I will never call Family Guy an all-around bad show, no matter how many horrible seasons they continue to make.
Now that you're stable